What's up guys, it's USA Specialist, and this video has been a long time coming. Now, it's no secret that Battlefield 2042 has had issues with Hit-Reg. But what if I told you in 2024, year 3 of this game, that servers can sometimes miss up to 20% of your shots, often causing you to lose encounters by only a few points of damage because that last shot was never counted? Well, in some cases, that's exactly what's happening, and thankfully, a while back, DICE even gave us the ability to call them out with an in-game hit-reg graph. But shockingly, not many people seem to care. So what's the deal with hit-reg? Is it as big of an issue as we think it is, or is Battlefield actually doing better than other comparable games? Well, after a few days of recording games, analyzing server data, and comparing Battlefield to its competitors, I have quite a few thoughts. So guys, hit subscribe and let's get into some of the numbers when it comes to Battlefield 2042's hit-reg. Right off the bat, let's define what hit-reg is and some of its key factors. For us today, hit-reg, hit registration, or hit detection is essentially the relationship between the player's local hardware and off-site servers, specifically how each end of that equation experiences the game. When I pull the trigger and get feedback that I've just landed a shot, the server should be in lockstep, experiencing the exact same thing and relaying that to the other player. That connection is dependent on something called a tick rate, essentially how many times the server and local clients talk per second. Within each tick is a packet of data which tells the server what the player is doing locally. Thus, a gunfight is essentially two players who are reacting to what the server says the other player is doing to them. And any break in that communication will alter the outcome of the fight, not just because of raw hit detection, but also how the incorrect location, damage, and movement data will make the other player react. Now, this entire system is determined by server hardware, local hardware, and netcode, or in other words, the back end of the game engine, and how it tells the hardware to communicate. Obviously, local network conditions do affect the outcome, but that typically results in more noticeable issues like disconnecting or missing large packets of data, causing lag or the player to update in jittery, uneven events. So for some transparency, here's my network where I'm playing on an RTX 4090, Ryzen 9, and a wired connection in the American Northeast. Now, at this point, you're probably asking, how does Battlefield's tick rate stack up to other comparable games? And Battlefield is ultimately right in the middle of the pack at 45 Hz or 45 ticks per second. For reference, Modern Warfare 2, with its smaller lobbies, is set at 60. The super competitive Valorant is 128, Halo is also 60, and Warzone 2 is a hot mess all the way down at 20. So in general, Battlefield 2042, which I feel is a casual shooter, has a pretty average tick rate. And when you tie in all the destruction, player count, and quick TTK, this is actually pretty impressive, but still could be better. So if Battlefield 2042 has a reasonable tick rate, why am I experiencing games like this? On your screen right now is some sped up footage of me playing 64-player Redacted with the network event graph enlarged. Over the course of a few minutes, you'll start to see the server's registered shots go out of sync with my client by about 19%, meaning that I landed almost 1/5 more shots on target than the servers were giving me credit for. Now, the footage you're watching is with an AEK on Redacted, a high rate of fire gun on a tight, player-saturated map. However, this footage is probably a good example of why most players and the devs don't really seem to care about hit-reg at this point. I stayed alive for several minutes, won several gunfights, and my movement was smooth and the graphics were unaffected. However, once you start to account for how much data is being missed per gunfight, you start to realize that over the course of an entire play session, you're working way harder than you need to for many of those kills, thus creating an uneven experience where you can feel the TTK change fight to fight, and sometimes not experience the enemy's shots until that damage hits you all at once, creating a deeply confusing and aggravating experience. One moment you kill in 6 shots, and the next it's 7. Sometimes you win the gunfight a lot easier than you should because the enemy gets the short end of the stick. And then in the next fight you get screwed because their positional data is just off enough to make you react incorrectly. After years of playing this franchise, especially games like 2042, Battlefield 4, and Battlefield 5, the biggest issue I see from Battlefield's netcode is inconsistency. How TTK, TTD, and how the player experiences damage can all be variable, and nothing supports that feeling more than the fact that different guns can have different hit reg probability. Remember that footage on Redacted with an AEK? Well, here's some gameplay of me on that same map with an even faster rate of fire K30, a weapon I expected to perform rather poorly. Over the course of a few games, the servers on average only registered about 86% of all confirmed hits. Over the course of one game in particular, the servers missed an entire 50 shots over the course of 27 minutes, which means at 18 damage per round, the servers cost me about 5.5 kills worth of damage. And funny enough, I was playing against enders, so any extra bit of damage I could get was going to be appreciated. With these higher rate of fire weapons like the K30, it almost feels like some of the shots are slipping into the cracks in between those 45 ticks, thus creating a large margin of error where you're missing sometimes up to 20% of your shots on target. Now, while I chose the K30 to demonstrate my point, for the sake of more fair data, I recorded several games using the M5, something I feel is a much more average gun with a moderate rate of fire. Across those several games, the M5 shockingly averaged a 95% server registration, meaning that only 5% of those shots were being missed. Now, that equates to only about 15 missed shots across 4 games, but let me show you why that matters. What you're watching on screen right now is a gunfight I technically won based on the client feedback, but because the server missed my final shot, I actually lost by only a fraction of health. This is where Hit-Reg matters, and can actually feel worse on a slower weapon, because missing a shot on a slower weapon is a much longer portion of time and a larger amount of data you just missed out on. I can spray the K30 all day, but miss a shot on the Scar or an M5, and you just missed a much larger amount of potential damage. And this phenomena where you lose your gunfight because the server failed to register your last shot was more common than I'd like. Essentially, Hit-Reg isn't a problem until it suddenly is, and the most common shots that ended up being missed were those last-second, life-saving hits, often in a chaotic gunfight. But at the end of the day, does this even matter? Battlefield is a casual shooter, and all things considered, has a higher tick rate than some competitors who are doing a lot less with their technical ability. Between destruction, player counts, vehicles, dynamic weather, interactive environments, and so on, I think 2042 is doing rather well. But I also think it's time for the Frostbite engine and the Battlefield franchise to rethink their backend and provide a stronger, higher frequency experience to really have the games feel fresh and snappy. I'm always going on about adding a competitive mode to this franchise like they tried with Battlefield 1, and fresh 60Hz servers would be a welcome addition to help the game feel more consistent and a lot less frustrating. Battlefield is a massive technical achievement, and when you're talking about 64 or 128 players in one lobby, that's a huge amount of positional data, environmental physics, and hit registration that has to be accounted for. Ultimately, the inconsistency between different weapons' hit probability is concerning, and having a few games where you see the servers missing 10 or 15% of all of your shots could really kill a player's enthusiasm to pick the game back up. While players with a more technical background may understand the back-end difficulties to improve this system, to many more competitive players, clear issues in Hit-Reg could be a real pain point, just like it is in many other games. But guys, that's only a handful of data across a few weapons, and I'd definitely like to see other creators record their own findings and watch where this conversation goes. Perhaps Battlefield falls within an acceptable margin of error, or maybe it's worse than other games because of all of the technical demands on top of an aging game engine. Either way, here's to hoping the next Frostbite improves this issue, and EA drops some more money into an even better back end. But drop those comments below and tell me what you think. For everything else Battlefield, stay tuned and subscribe, and as always, thank you guys for watching.